Good morning, everybody. My name is Tim Harris. It's 10 o'clock. It's time for 10 with Tim. For the first time in all of this time, I'm not in my office this morning. I am actually on Lookout Mountain in Tennessee, Chattanooga, where my wife's parents live. Casey's dad is in ICU at the hospital down here. We made a quick trip down to help care for her mother and see to her dad. So pray for Casey's father, Tom Wilson. I will probably be here for today and tomorrow, so I may be on location again tomorrow. So I appreciate your patience with me, but I do want to stay committed to our time in the Word together. We're in the book of Titus, chapter 2, verses 1-15 today. Remember, we're going verse by verse through the Word of God. We're going to do Titus, finishing up tomorrow, and then we'll do the book of Philemon Thursday and Friday, and then we'll take a break for Christmas. How is that? Well, let's jump in. Titus chapter 2. Remember that yesterday, Paul was giving very, very practical, down-to-business advice to Titus about how to complete the work and appoint leaders for the church there in Crete. At the end of chapter 1, he makes that point about the opponents. He says that these are people who claim to know God, but they deny Him by the way they live. So Paul in chapter 2 is setting up a contrast here. It begins with verse 1, as for you. As for you. So there's a contrast here. There's a way that the world lives, and there's a way that believers live. And Paul is trying to explain that difference. In so many ways, it's like, do we have to explain this? But it seems like we do. There are a whole lot of folks who believe that the gospel itself just simply, gets you a ticket to heaven, but doesn't necessarily affect the way you live your life here. You know what I mean? People who say that Jesus is going to take them to heaven, but they're going to live like hell down here. And that's not how this works. And this is what chapter 2 is about. Paul is trying to simply lay out the basics. This is how Christian people live. Now, what you'll notice here is that it's observable behavior, because for Paul, the only thing that matters is the gospel. And I love the way this passage here just lays out all the age groups, male, female, young, old, because every single believer is living life on mission. We all have the very same purpose. We're saved by the very same gospel, and we have this obligation, this responsibility, this privilege of using our lives as a platform for gospel influence. You understand me? And so it doesn't matter who you are, male or female. It doesn't matter what station of life you're in. It's about the gospel. And so you want to live your life in such a way, it says in verse 10, so that you make the gospel attractive. You know what I mean? People look at you and they say, my goodness, I want whatever it is that she has. I'm watching her with her children. I'm watching him at work. And whatever it is that makes that guy like he is, I want that. And Paul is saying, this is how believers live. We make other people see us and then want to belong to Jesus the way we belong to Jesus. So it's kind of a delicate sort of, line that we have to walk. Because on the one hand, in this passage, most of what Paul is advising here is just, it's just cultural. In other words, they're just being asked to fulfill their station in life, the way most good people in the culture would, in some ways with or without Jesus. In other words, be a good man, just be a good lady, be a good husband, be a good wife. It's just that sort of thing. But again, the point is, we don't want to call attention to ourselves in such a way that's going to reflect poorly on the gospel. In other words, if they're going to be talking about you, make sure they're talking about Jesus and not just about how you crazy you're with your kids, So, in other words, you want to live your life in such a way where you just simply disappear into Jesus. So, he just begins in chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, first instructions to older men. The older men, it's the same where there's elders, although we're not talking about an office of the church here, but the elders in the church would probably come from this group. And so you notice that in so many ways the instructions are more or less the same. We want them to be self-controlled. We want them to be worthy of respect, living wisely, sound faith, filled with love and patience. It's the same sorts of qualities that are prescribed for the older men elsewhere in Titus in Timothy as well. And so first and second verses here are more or less what we've been saying to the older men. But now, verse 3, the older women. I love this. New Living Translation says, teach them to live in a way that honors God. Actually, the word there is just teach them to be holy. Holy. The word there is typically reserved for those who are serving in the temple. We're talking about, being set apart. We're talking about a priest who might be set apart simply always to be ready and able and fit to serve the Lord. And so the women, older women, are set apart like that. And I love that. They are set apart in holiness, but they are also, in some ways, uniquely set apart for teaching. By their example, by their words, they're going to lead the way. Most of us know that it's the older women in every family, if they know the Lord, and it's the older women in every church that are just the glue. I'm telling you, it's the older women at Woodburn, in the church I serve. Man, it's our senior ladies who lead us in praying and faithfulness in prayer. It's these ladies who serve. I mean, if you drive by in the week and you see cars out front, there's always some men. I'm not saying there aren't, but I'm just saying, the women in the church, the women in the family, man, can you not just all say, man, they are somehow the spiritual glue. And so Paul says here, teach these older women just to be set apart as holy, and then empower them to teach, especially the younger women. And this is where he goes next, verses 4 and 5. Have them train the younger women. Now the word there, train, it literally means something like wise them up, wise them up. The implication is that you want them to have their minds about them. You want them to understand what matters. You want them to find their place. You want them to wise them up. And I love that. 6 qualities Paul gives here in relation to the younger women. Now primarily the instructions here are related to their husbands and their children. Why is that? Well, again, because they live in the world they live in. And Paul, for the most part, as I say, is trying to just help them to find their place in their culture as godly women. And if they're going to be talking about you, make sure they're talking about Jesus. So this really isn't the place or the time in Paul's mind for them to, kind of overturn the patriarchy, That's really, in Paul's mind, it's about the gospel. You want to live your life in such a way where they're talking about Jesus and not talking about you, leading the protest. I'm not saying that we shouldn't protest against injustice. I'm not saying that at all. It's just that in the ancient world, women didn't have careers. Women didn't have opportunities for that. They primarily cared for their homes. And so Paul here, if you notice, is not demeaning that. He's simply elevating that to the same level as everything else. You will use your life also as a platform of gospel influence. You are not less than, you are equal to. And you have the same obligation to live for Jesus and make sure that your life makes other people want to have Jesus the way you've got Jesus. So in your life at home, in your life with your husband, in your life with the children, because this is the ancient world and that was their life. You understand? And so then he goes on, verse 6 talks about younger men. There's actually only one quality that he gives for the younger men, and it comes down to, man, will you just help them be clear-headed? It's self-control. It's that idea, well, you just teach young men to keep their heads, Oh my goodness, do y'all know young men? It's just like, well, you just teach them to keep their heads screwed on, and I love that. Now, after that, of course, there's a word here to Titus himself, and I love it. Apparently, Titus falls into that young man category. And the idea is, Titus has got to be a good example. People are going to want to criticize you, and the world's going to be looking at you. Again, if they're going to talk about you, make sure they're talking about Jesus. Don't give them anything bad to say. Don't live your life in such a way where they got other things to talk about other than simply the way you reflect Jesus. I know. I think some of you probably really understand this. Some of you are probably really struggling with this because our culture teaches us that so many other things are so much more important. Your sexual identity, your cultural identity, your existence as a victim. And Paul's just saying, okay, I'm not erasing any of that. I'm just simply saying the gospel, the gospel, the gospel. Use your life as a platform of gospel influence. You are on mission. And so Titus, don't give him anything bad to say. Now there's a long section here related to slaves and servants. And because we're going to do Philemon at the end of the week, I'm going to save that. Okay, I'm going to save that. We're going to come back to the issue of slavery in the New Testament and these kinds of household codes. We'll talk about that at the end of the week, so just hang with me. Verses 11 to 15 just give the gospel rationale for why it is that we just can't go out there and live like everybody else. You know, our lives in many ways, we're in the same culture. It's not that we're like Martians or total weirdos. In so many ways, we don't call attention to ourselves in the culture. We call attention to Jesus, and we live our lives in such a way where the gospel becomes attractive. I just love that so much. You must teach these things and encourage the believers to do them, Paul says. And you've got the authority to correct them when necessary. So don't let anybody disregard what you say. Again, Paul is always concerned that these young men, Titus, Timothy, that they won't listen to him. That Titus won't come out there and try to teach them, how to live, and they're going to run his pants up the flagpole. And Paul's like, no, don't you let them look down on you because you're young. Don't you let them disrespect you. Don't let them disregard you. You have authority. And so you teach them what they need to know. I love that. Isn't that good? Tomorrow, pick up right there. Chapter 3, verses 1 to 15. We'll be done with Titus. Again, the letters of Paul in the New Testament are arranged in order of length, and we're doing the shortest two because they're good and because it'll help us wrap it up before Christmas break. So again, pray for my wife, pray for her family, and pray for me as I work here on top of this mountain. I love you guys so much. Stay in the Word, read ahead, Titus chapter 3, verses 1 to 15, and I will see you in the morning, Lord willing.